There's an arrest warrant out for your son.
What? My mind went blank when I heard those words. What? Why? My son? What do you mean, arrested? Questions swirled through my mind, coming and going. I stood dumbfounded at the door, unable to speak, as the police officer stepped onto the doorstep. It was probably to prevent me from closing the door. Feeling a sense of danger, I instinctively tried to shut it.
Your son is home, isn't he? We're coming in.
Wait, please, just wait a moment. I desperately tried to stop the officer from coming in. I pushed against his chest. I planted my feet firmly in front of the door, trying to block him. Look, I have no idea what you're talking about. Could you at least explain what's going on? I pleaded with the officer. He folded the arrest warrant and let out a big sigh.
Ma'am, I get it. You never thought your son would commit theft, did you?
Theft.
He ran off with cash. He was clearly identified, so there's no denying it.
His tone was exasperated. Theft? My son? But I forced myself to process the officer's words, despite my mind reeling. With a pale face, I turned to the officer and said, "My son would never do such a thing."
Parents always say that.
The officer responded, looking tired. But I was certain my son was innocent. Because I'm just an ordinary housewife, Mary Smith, 50 years old. My husband, son, and I worked hard to save up and build a house where the three of us live happily. The three of us get along great and enjoy our days together. I was in the middle of a happy life, or so I thought. But now, I was feeling a bit tired. Lately, things haven't been going well, and whenever I'm alone, all I can think about is how hard everything is. Oh, I need to take care of that too. Even when I was alone, I couldn't help but say out loud all the things I needed to do. Ugh, maybe I can do it later. I tried to escape reality by lazily turning on the TV at home. When my mind isn't working, I should take a little break. My body feels tired too. Making excuses to myself, I watched a soap opera. But even then, I couldn't really focus on the show, and my mind stayed blank. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see various certificates and trophies lined up. My son, Michael, had won numerous awards in soccer. I was really proud of him. While I was thinking about that, ding dong. Oh, yes, coming. The doorbell rang. I turned down the volume on the TV and got up from the couch. Maybe my mother-in-law sent something again, or maybe it's something I ordered online. Sometimes my mother-in-law sends us vegetables without notice. She finds it a hassle to call each time, so she sometimes sends them without any warning. But lately, my son has been doing a lot of online shopping. My husband picked up the habit and has also started shopping online. That might be the case. Thinking about that, I headed to the door without any caution. If I had checked the camera on the doorbell, I wouldn't have been so surprised. But since I wasn't being cautious, I didn't check the camera and went straight to the door. Okay, I'm opening. I opened the door. I was shocked by what I saw in front of me.
Hello. Is this the Smith residence?
Oh, yes. What do the police need? There were 3 police officers standing at the door, just like in the dramas I had just watched, wearing masks. It's funny. When you see the police, you get nervous, even if you haven't done anything wrong. Like maybe you did something without realizing it. So yes, I was really nervous. My hand gripping the door went stiff. One of the officers held up a piece of paper for me to see. I couldn't understand what it was. As I squinted to see it, arrest. One of the officers, showing me the paper, coldly said,
There's an arrest warrant out for your son.
"What?" I blurted out as stunned, "What?" It came out instinctively without thinking. And then my mind went completely blank. Wait, why? My son? Arrested? What does that mean? Did he do something? Questions floated through my mind, one after another. I stood at the door, my mouth opening and closing in shock, unable to speak, as the police officer stepped onto the doorstep. This was surely to prevent me from closing the door. Faced with 3 large men, I felt a sense of danger and instinctively tried to shut the door. But the officer wouldn't allow it. He pressed his foot against the door to keep it open. It was terrifying.
Your son is home, right? May we come in?
Oh, well,
If there's nothing to hide, it should be fine to let us in, right?
Wait, hold on a second. I desperately tried to stop the officer from coming in. I pushed against his chest. I planted my feet firmly in front of the door, trying to block him. I have no idea what this is about. Could you at least explain what's going on? I pleaded with the officer. I had no idea what they were talking about. What could my son have done to get an arrest warrant? Then one of the officers folded the warrant and let out a big sigh.
Ma'am, I understand. You never thought your son would commit theft, right?
Theft.
Recently, there's been a lot of theft in this area. According to witnesses, your son looks very similar to the suspect.
Someone saw my son?
Yes, it seems he ran off with some cash. Some witnesses saw him running towards your house. There are even people who got a good look at his face, so there's no denying it.
He said this with an exasperated expression. Theft. My son. I forced the officer's words into my blank mind. One of the officers, looking at me, opened another piece of paper and started talking. I wasn't shown the paper. He began to speak, seemingly reading from it.
Well, it seems your son is involved in several thefts. The total amount of the damage is about $30,000. However, the victims are willing to settle since your son is still young.
$30,000. There's no way my son could do something like that.
Parents always say that. For now, please prepare the $30,000. We'd like to speak with your son.
I shouted in shock, but the officer responded with a tired expression. But while looking at the officer's face, I thought, and then reached for the door again. Please wait outside for a moment.
No, we'll wait inside.
I need to use the bathroom. Surely you wouldn't be so unreasonable as to enter the house and search while the homeowner is in the bathroom, right? Or can't you wait 5 minutes for me to use the bathroom? I said whatever came to mind. I needed a moment to calm down. Most importantly, the large male officers were terrifying, and I wanted to close the door. Please, just let me use the bathroom quickly. I promise I'll listen to everything you have to say.
Ma'am.
I just can't. It's urgent.
What?
The officer hesitated for a moment at my words. Seizing the chance, I slammed the door shut. There was a loud bang. It was probably the sound of an officer's foot hitting the door. But I ignored it, shut the front door, and quickly locked it. As soon as I heard the lock click, my mind was flooded with various thoughts. Relief, fear, and numerous questions. Bang, bang, bang. Whoa!
Open up, ma'am.
The officers pounded on the door. Worried about disturbing the neighbors, I slowly backed away from the door. I'll be right back. Just going to the bathroom. I hurried to the bathroom. I didn't really need to go, but it seemed like the right thing to do. Calm down, calm down. I muttered to myself, desperately trying to stay composed. As I talked to myself, my mind began to clear up bit by bit. I actually went into the bathroom and sat down. My hand, holding the toilet paper, was shaking. There was no way Michael could be involved in a crime. It had to be a case of mistaken identity. I decided to face the officers with a firm attitude. After all, we had nothing to hide. After about 5 minutes, I returned to the front door. Phew. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door. I faced the 3 officers again.
Ma'am.
One of the officers yelled at me. Despite my efforts to remain calm, I spoke to myself internally, trying to stay composed.
You didn't let your son escape during that time, did you? Anyway, let us in to search the house.
He didn't escape, and, as I said before, my son didn't commit theft. He couldn't have.
It doesn't matter what you say. We have eyewitness testimonies and camera footage. If you cover for your son, you'll be in trouble too.
You didn't mention cameras earlier, did you?
Well, if you won't admit it, we'll have to show you the evidence.
First, you said he looked similar, and now you're saying it's definitely him. Your story keeps changing, doesn't it?
Ma'am, I understand you don't want to believe it, but
The officer kept pushing me, but his words were inconsistent and strange. He kept bringing up new information. This seems suspicious, and now that I look closely, their uniforms, they look like something out of a TV show. I stared intently at the youngest-looking officer. When he met my gaze, he quickly looked away. That made him seem even more suspicious.
ma'am, enough of this. We're coming in.
Hey, wait, you can't just. The largest and oldest-looking officer, frustrated with my refusal to let them in, pushed me aside and entered the house. Stop, don't come in. I tried to push back like before, but there was no way I could overpower a grown man. Ah, I fell on my backside as the officer pushed past me. As soon as I hit the ground, the 3 officers barged into the house. I quickly got up, rubbing my sore bottom. I rushed after the officers who were heading further into the house. "Hey, you can't just come in like this, and don't touch that," I shouted at the officers. But my words fell on deaf ears as the 3 officers opened and closed every drawer in the kitchen and living room, rummaging through everything. Seeing them touch and mess with everything made me feel sick. I said, "Stop, hey." One officer was opening the drawer where I kept my precious wedding ring. I rushed over and slammed the drawer shut. Bang! The loud noise echoed. "There's nothing here. You can't just invade someone's home and open all their drawers." I glared at the young officer who had averted his eyes earlier. He nodded slightly and moved to another room. Soon, the 3 officers headed toward my son's room. There was a nameplate with his name on the door. They immediately knew it was his room. They could easily tell it was my son's room. The 3 officers entered the room without any hesitation. "That's my son's room. He's sleeping right now. Don't go in," I screamed with all my might. But they didn't listen and opened the door.
We need to talk to him.
What?
Huh?
This time, it wasn't me, but the 3 officers who froze. They stopped dead in their tracks upon entering my son's room. All their eyes were fixed on the bed in the room.
"Nice to meet you. I heard the conversation. I'm Michael."
My son greeted the 3 officers politely from his bed. Then, spreading his hands and smiling slightly, he spoke to the officers.
"Oh, as you can see, there's no way I could have committed theft."
The officers stared at my son in silence. He was lying in a hospital bed with a special mattress to prevent bed sores. Next to the bed was a wheelchair. There were lots of towels and a call button. In front of them was my bedridden son. The officers were shocked.
Oh well. Sorry. It seems we made a mistake.
The officer who had been speaking threateningly to me gave a strained smile. My son also smiled a little.
"Yeah, I thought so. Glad to hear it. I can't move my lower body, so it's kind of impossible for me to commit theft and run away."
He pointed to his wheelchair. The officers nervously glanced at it.
"I need someone's help just to get into that. I can't even go outside on my own."
Oh, I see. Sorry for the mistake. We'll just.
The officers began to apologize and prepared to leave. I felt a surge of anger and clenched my fists, ready to say something. But then, one of the officers didn't leave my son's room. Instead, he approached my son.
What happened to you? What happened to you?
"Huh? Is that you, Alex?"
My son Michael looked at the approaching officer with a happy expression. I turned around, surprised. It was the youngest officer. When he raised his face to get a good look at my son, I realized it was Alex, Michael's old classmate. "Oh my, Alex." I was so surprised. Alex Peterson. He was Michael's friend from elementary school. They were also soccer buddies. In elementary school, Michael and Alex were on the soccer team together. They both loved soccer and practiced together almost every day, always coming home together. They were that close. We used to talk about how they would probably join the soccer club together in middle school. But then Alex had to move away. His family had to relocate due to his parents' work, and they had to say goodbye. The sudden move left no time to exchange contact information, and they lost touch.
I followed your soccer career. I saw you in magazines after you got into college. So, what happened?
Alex looked at Michael with a face that had gone from pale to white. He had a look of disbelief. Seeing Alex's expression, Michael pulled back the blanket. There were his legs, now immobile.
I was in an accident about a month ago. Now I'm paralyzed from the waist down.
He smiled faintly, looking a bit sad. Alex stared at him with a pained expression. Noticing this, Michael covered his legs again and gave a big, forced smile.
But enough about that. It's been so long. You became a cop. What about soccer? Did you quit?
Alex's face grew complex. He mumbled a bit before answering quietly.
I'm not as talented as you, and things were tough at home.
I remembered hearing rumors back in elementary school that Alex's father didn't have a steady job and was out drinking every night. I heard they moved because debt collectors were after them. Michael, now sitting up, spoke eagerly.
What are you talking about? You always worked hard. I was always jealous of you. You never gave up, and that was so cool. I was able to do my best thanks to you.
That's not true.
But now you're working hard as a police officer. Seeing you gives me strength.
I see.
I should get back to it. Hey, let's play soccer again sometime. Where do you live now? Even though I'm like this, I can still play soccer as a disabled person. Alex?
Alex looked down. His face was pale. Michael leaned in to check on him.
Hey, are you okay, Alex?
Ugh.
Hey, Alex.
Tears began to drip onto the floor. Alex started crying as he looked at Michael.
Hey, what's wrong?
Michael tried to talk to him, but Alex was too overwhelmed to respond and was struggling to hold back his sobs. Meanwhile, the other two officers quietly slipped past me. "Where are you going?" I glared at the two officers. They flinched at my angry gaze.
Oh, well, it was a mistake. We need to continue our investigation, so we'll be going.
What? Without even an apology? Unbelievable. They touched and messed up everything. I was about to shout at them when it happened.
I quit.
Alex raised his head and faced the two officers. Tears were still in his eyes, but he glared at them with determination.
What? You can't just quit now.
You're the one who said this place was rich.
You know this is wrong. I'm telling the police everything.
What? You little.
An argument broke out between the officers. One of them angrily marched toward Alex. Bang. "Hey, stop it." I tried to stop him, but it was no use. I was too scared to move, and only my voice responded. The officer threw a punch at Alex. His face turned bright red from the hit. Alex staggered and fell to the floor, but the other officer kicked him.
Ugh.
Then you pay the money. Pay your dad's debt. Got it?
Bang! Slam! The two big men continued to hit and kick him. I was too shocked and scared to stop them. After a while, they finally let Alex go. Even clutching his stomach, Alex looked up at them and said he would turn himself in.
I'm turning myself in. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm not the person you used to know. I've always been jealous of you. I don't have any talents, a good family, but I hate myself for using that as an excuse to do terrible things.
You.
One of the officers raised his hand to hit Alex again when
Hands up!
What?
everyone turned to look. I felt relieved and my legs gave way when I saw who had arrived.
Back off. Now.
Ma'am, are you all right?
An officer, showing his badge, entered. He quickly restrained the fake officers with practiced ease. He was a real cop.
I'm sorry we took so long. Are you and your son okay?
Oh, yes, we're fine. Somehow. The truth was, I had called the police while I was in the bathroom. I suspected something was off with the 3 people claiming to be police officers. So I decided to call the police myself.
Ouch.
Stay still.
The fake officers were being taken away. They struggled, but the real police restrained them efficiently and swiftly escorted them out of the house. They also helped Alex, who was lying on the floor in pain, to stand up and let him out. Alex complied without resistance.
Alex,
Michael called out. Alex stopped and looked at Michael and me. Then he bowed his head as low as he could.
I'm sorry.
He said, and was taken away by the police. Michael watched until Alex was out of sight. That day, we were questioned and cleaned up the house while waiting for my husband to return. Even though he was busy and worked far away, he rushed home as soon as he could. He kept apologizing for not being able to respond immediately, but I told him not to worry since everything turned out okay. A few days later, Alex was the only one of the 3 who confessed everything to the police. It turned out they were connected through high school. There had indeed been a series of thefts in this area, and it turned out that these thefts were their doing. They targeted wealthy homes, tricking parents into thinking their children were involved and extorting money from them. The arrest warrants were forgeries, and the police uniforms were just costumes. Most parents panicked upon hearing about theft and seeing the police uniforms, making it easy to deceive them. However, this time, their scheme was exposed, and they were caught. As for Alex, he initially worked hard to repay his father's debts. However, he was unable to pay it off due to the interest, and he was apparently tempted by this incident and decided to pay back his debt. He was coerced into this scheme with promises of debt relief if he provided information about wealthy families in his old neighborhood. That's why they knew so much about the area and had managed to avoid detection until now. In the end, they were all charged and arrested. They faced serious charges for unlawfully entering homes and attempting to extort money. Most of all, impersonating police officers resulted in severe penalties. Michael wasn't shocked. Instead, he nodded in agreement.
He decided to turn himself in and face the consequences. I always knew Alex was a good guy at heart.
He listened to my story with a smile.
Yeah, but it's amazing they didn't get caught sooner with that look.
Did you know from the start, Michael?
Well, it's hard to believe someone who isn't fit could be a cop. Alex was in much better shape back then. Seeing him now, it was obvious it was a lie.
Michael had been observant. When I asked him later, he said he noticed that Alex kept his head down and avoided eye contact. And although his voice had changed, it still sounded like Alex. He had felt suspicious about many things. I wonder how long it will take for him to come back. It hasn't been decided yet.
It's okay. No matter how long it takes, he can reform. I know he can. He's still the same person he was.
Michael said firmly. A month later, I brought breakfast to Michael's room. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Mom. Did you get one today?
Michael asked about something else before breakfast. Smiling, I handed him a letter. It was a simple envelope. Gosh, you care more about Alex than breakfast?
Well, yeah.
Michael held the letter. It was from Alex. What does it say?
He wants to play soccer together. He's been exercising over there too.
It seemed like a cheerful letter had arrived. Seeing my son read the letter with a happy face made me smile too. Beside him was a new wheelchair, different from the one before. It was for playing soccer. Michael decided to start practicing soccer in a wheelchair. He began training for power soccer, a version of soccer for electric wheelchair users. After he decided to play soccer with Alex again, Michael immediately told me and his father about it. He was eager to play soccer in a wheelchair. He was full of motivation. Seeing my son like that made me decide. There are tough times and things that don't go well, but it's not just me. Even my always smiling son must have his struggles. Yet he keeps moving forward with a positive attitude, and that inspired me. I decided to live my life to the fullest too. Today, I felt like I could do anything I set my mind to.
You're a defective product since you can't give us grandchildren. Get divorced and get out.
With those words, Linda waved her hands as if shooing away a bug. Tom, without addressing Linda's behavior, made no attempt to help me. Understood. I don't want to stay in this house any longer either, so I accept the divorce. I said, glaring at Linda. Tom looked surprised. Did he think I would cry and cling or apologize to Linda?
Got it? Then leave now. You got a plague.
I'll leave without you having to tell me twice. Then I gathered my belongings left in the yard and left the house. The year after divorcing Tom, I decided to send a letter to my former in-laws. A healthy baby boy was born. It included a photo of me with my beloved son and the words, "It was my way of revenge." The following month, I received a barrage of frantic calls from Tom on my smartphone. Seeing this, I couldn't help but smirk. My name is Ashley Martin, a working mom striving daily. My job is an illustrator, and thankfully, I receive plenty of work requests from various places. I want to be an artist when I grow up. I've said since I was little. My parents supported my dreams, always praising me. What a lovely drawing.
Ashley, you'll definitely create art that everyone acknowledges.
My dad always supported me the most. He was a children's book author, and I loved his gentle illustrations. I want to draw like Dad. I told him once, and he beamed with joy. Although my dream has slightly changed, I've achieved it and enjoy my days at work.
Ashley, how's the progress on that project?
It's on schedule. Looks like there won't be any issues until delivery. I met my husband Tom through work. He worked for a major company, and our initial connection was when they hired me to create illustrations for their website.
I fell in love with your illustrations. Could we talk more about it?
That was how he approached me. From there, our relationship deepened, and soon he confessed his feelings for me.
I want to build a happy home with you, Ashley. Will you marry me?
Following his proposal, I married Tom.
I think we can overcome anything together with you.
Tom said with a smile. Believing that I could have happy days with him, I chose to be with Tom. Once this is over, I think I'll take a short break. How about we go on a trip?
Sounds good. I'll adjust the schedule.
We like traveling and frequently go on trips together. Though we don't have children, I believe we've built a reasonably happy home. When I was working at home, the doorbell rang. Is it her again? I sighed and checked the visitor on the monitor. Sure enough, it was Linda. I sighed again and opened the front door. What's up, Linda?
Just the usual check. Let me in quickly.
She said, barging into the houses. Watching her back, I wondered if I could get any work done today as I reviewed my schedule in my head.
Don't just stand there. Make some tea at least. You really aren't thoughtful.
Yes, I'm sorry. Our house and my in-laws are within walking distance. That's probably why Linda shows up unannounced like this. Honestly, I don't want to let her in, but one time when I pretended not to be home, she used a spare key to let herself in.
If you're home, let me in quickly.
That time, I was lectured for hours and couldn't focus on my work. I've changed the locks before, but Tom keeps making spare keys and giving them to her, so it's only a temporary fix. This time, she was holding a spare key in her right hand, so she would have entered on her own if I hadn't come out.
You're home all day, and you can't even manage the housework properly?
Linda pointed at the laundry left out. Tom had changed out of these clothes before heading to work and just left them there. Yes, I'm sorry.
And you feeding Tom properly?
Arguing back only makes the lectures last longer. Just saying I'm sorry will eventually bore her and she'll leave. So I just endured this painful time.
So, when are you going to let me hold my grandchild?
At that, I couldn't help but look down. For years now, Linda has been pressuring me to have children soon. I want children too. But no matter how long I wait, they just haven't come.
I wonder if you're infertile.
I've been told by the doctor that there's nothing wrong. We started trying to conceive 6 months after getting married. But I never got pregnant, so I had tests done at the gynecologist. According to the results, there's nothing wrong with me. In fact, I was told I'm more likely to conceive.
Are you sure that doctor is reliable? Well, whatever. Just don't bother Tom.
I was irritated, but I tried not to show it. I see. Satisfied with my response, Linda finished her remaining criticisms of the housework and left early. I'm glad she left early this time. In the beginning, when we were newly married, Richard was there as a stopper, so it wasn't this bad.
Don't cling to your son forever.
Richard didn't approve of Linda's meddling in her son's marriage. In fact, he tried to stop Linda from making unannounced visits.
Tom has his own family now. A parent should trust and watch over their child.
It was because of Richard that Linda didn't come to our house unannounced or at all. But that changed when Richard passed away from illness.
Remember, you should prioritize Ashley above all. A man who can't protect his wife shouldn't call himself a husband.
Richard said this to Tom even as he was battling his illness.
Of course, just like Dad should protect Mom, so it's wrong to leave her behind.
I remember Tom responding that way to Richard. Not long after, Richard passed away. That's when Linda's meddling started to spiral out of control. I'll talk to Tom, but it won't solve anything. It would be great if Tom could be a stopper, but he completely trusts Linda. When I brought up Linda's behavior before, all he said was, "It's probably just for now." So Linda's unannounced visits continue. For the sake of my work, I have to do something about it. With that, I decided to finish up the remaining work I had left. Tom, I need to talk to you about Linda. I brought up Linda when Tom came home for dinner. At first, he listened kindly, asking, "What's up?" But as I continued, his smile turned into a wry one.
It can't be helped. Mom is just worried about me.
If she's worried about you, she should come when you're here, right?
That's true. Well, I'll talk to her about it too.
Tom said with a laugh, but he never really addressed the issue with Linda. Tom avoids conflict and can't speak strongly to anyone. Especially with Linda, no matter what is said or done, he just dismisses it with, "It can't be helped." At least don't give her the spare key. I can't work if she enters whenever she wants.
But what if it's an emergency?
It's better not to give it if it's misused. Even though I stated my case firmly, Tom was not convinced, just muttering, "Really?" It frustrates me, but I try to control myself. If these unannounced visits continue, I'll change the locks, and I won't give you the new key.
Hey, that would be a problem. I won't be able to get into the house when I come back from work.
I'll be inside, so I'll open the door when you come back. If you don't like that, either talk to Linda or take the spare key away. It was only after saying all this that Tom finally nodded. Okay. However, I don't really expect Tom to take action. It feels like it'll just end up being brushed off again. How can I make him understand? Just after murmuring this, my smartphone pinged with a notification. It was a message from my childhood friend Ryan Smith.
How have you been, Ashley? If you're free, do you want to go out for drinks sometime?
His considerate message slightly eased my irritation. Ryan and I lived in the same neighborhood and used to play together all the time without worrying about each other's schedules. But now we check each other's availability. And that makes me reflect somewhat deeply on how we've grown up. Of course, I'd love to. I also have something I'd like to discuss. He quickly responded to my reply.
That's fine. But have you checked with Tom?
Ryan and Tom interact through work and occasionally dine together. Thanks to that, Tom doesn't mind at all if I meet with Ryan. I know. I'll let you know the approved date.
If you've got it sorted, then it's fine.
I'd like to discuss Tom with Ryan if possible. But as a married woman meeting Ryan, who is single, just the two of us, I need to inform Tom properly. Ryan invited me for drinks. Is it okay if I go?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll be eating out that day too, so just let me know the date and time later.
Tom gave his permission easily. Grateful, I quickly contacted Ryan to arrange the schedule.
So, what's this talk about?
A few days later, we were at a familiar bar. This bar, run by a couple we know, is open like a diner, so Ryan and I wouldn't be alone. We often choose this spot to drink because of our acquaintance with the owners. Well, it's about Linda and Tom. I wanted to discuss Linda and Tom and was looking for a male perspective on the situation.
Honestly, she's different from my mom, so I don't know what to say.
Ryan grew up in a single-parent home. He lives separately from his mom, but apparently keeps in touch regularly.
My mom actually lets me live my life as long as I don't bother anyone else.
Richard was kind of like that too. He used to keep Linda in check. Ryan mused again,
If his wife is uncomfortable and his father told him so, Tom should really be stepping in. But given his personality, should I talk to Tom?
I pondered his words for a moment. Maybe Ryan could make Tom listen. That sounds good. I'd appreciate it. If that doesn't work, I'll have to resort to drastic measures.
Right. Sometimes a little shock is necessary to get the point across. Well, I'll do my best to avoid that.
Ryan said, sounding quite dependable. Then he changed the subject. Enough of the gloomy talk. Let's enjoy our drinks tonight. And I nodded in agreement. Sometime after going out with Ryan, it seemed Tom had finally said something to Linda, possibly because someone else pointed it out.
What a cocky daughter-in-law. Poor Tom having someone like you as his wife.
Linda began calling daily, stopping the unannounced visits. I used work as an excuse to ignore these calls, expecting her to give up eventually.
Actually, my mom called me. I'll be going to her place this weekend. Oh, and Ashley, you don't need to come.
All right, got it. Instead, Tom started being summoned to his parents' house. It could be as often as once a week or at least 3 times a month. It was odd since previously it had just been Linda visiting, but since I was always told to stay home, I didn't mind. Well, if it keeps the peace, then it's fine. I thought settling in for the long haul. However, an incident would happen that made me regret this arrangement. All right then, I'm off.
Yeah, have a good one.
I left for a business trip due to an event. Normally, Tom doesn't do much housework, but he can manage if he wants to. So I left the household matters to him, and I headed alone to the event venue in another region. It was tough but fun. I thought, feeling tired but fulfilled as I returned home. What's this? However, that feeling quickly faded when I saw the state of our yard. Belongings were scattered messily across the yard, and all the items were mine, including work tools and keepsake items. Tom, what's all this? I called out to Tom, who I assumed was inside, almost shouting in my query.
Can't you come in quietly? Must you be so loud?
It wasn't Tom who answered, but Linda. Why is Linda here? Linda grinned when I was dazed.
About the stuff in the yard. I threw them out.
What? Linda did.
Yes, I thought I'd throw out an unwanted daughter-in-law along with her stuff.
I was stunned, not understanding what she meant. Then Tom peeked out from the back of the house. Tom, what's going on? Explain this.
Well, that's.
When I asked him, Tom avoided my gaze. As I was getting frustrated with his evasive attitude and about to ask again, Linda burst out laughing.
Tell her, Tom, we don't need an infertile wife.
Infertile? There's nothing wrong with me.
Then why haven't you had children after 5 years of marriage?
I wished I knew the answer to that myself. As I thought this, Linda presented a divorce form.
We found a more suitable wife for Tom, so we don't need you anymore.
The form already had Tom's section filled out. When I looked at Tom again, he awkwardly averted his eyes.
A defective product that can't produce grandchildren should just get divorced and leave.
Linda said dismissively, shooing me away with her hand. Tom did nothing to reprimand Linda or help me. Understood. I don't want to stay in this house anymore either, so I accept the divorce. I said, glaring at Linda. Tom looked surprised. Did he think I would cry and cling or apologize to Linda?
If you understand, then leave quickly, you god of plague.
I'll leave without being told twice. Then I gathered my belongings that had been left in the yard and left the house. Ryan, can you help me out a bit?
What's up?
Ryan came over as soon as I called. With his help, I moved my belongings.
That woman had another man. It's definitely good that you got divorced.
Linda was saying inside the house. I'll definitely show them. With that vow in my heart, Ryan was looking at me intently.
Ashley, if it's okay with you.
What? The year after I divorced Tom, I decided to send a letter to my former in-laws. A healthy baby boy was born. It included a photo of me with my beloved son and the words, "This was my way of getting revenge. Thank you for coming to me, my dear Oliver," I said, smiling at my son. And the next month, I received a number of calls from Tom on my phone. Smirking, I picked up the phone.
What do you mean, son?
Tom's voice sounded frantic. Laughing at his reaction, I left Oliver with my current husband and stepped aside. What do you mean? My precious son was born at the end of the year.
But Ashley, you were infertile, right?
That was just something Linda said unilaterally. I actually have a body likely to conceive. As I said this, noise erupted on the other end of the line.
Well done.
What? Unwillingly hearing Linda's voice, I couldn't help but speak in a low tone. Oblivious to my reaction, Linda excitedly began to talk.
That child is Tom's son, right? And a boy at that. You're welcome to come back then.
Apparently, Linda still hadn't realized the truth. I might as well tell her myself then. You seem to be under a misconception, but that child isn't Tom's by blood.
Don't lie. You probably haven't found anyone else anyway. You're still alone, aren't you? If the child is with you, we might consider taking you back into the family.
The thing is, Tom is the infertile one. I cut Linda off to tell the truth. Her voice halted abruptly.
What? Tom is infertile?
Yes, that's why we couldn't have children when we were together. Actually, there was one time I managed to persuade Tom to undergo fertility testing with me. The results had come in before our divorce, but in all the chaos, I had forgotten to check them. But when I got pregnant, I checked those results. It turned out it would be best to give up on natural conception with Tom.
That's a lie.
Her precious son turned out to be infertile, and because of him, she couldn't have grandchildren. This fact seemed to be quite a shock to Linda. She could say nothing but, "It's a lie."
But then whose child is the one on the letter?
He's my son. Any complaints?
Just then, a voice came from behind, and my phone was snatched from my hand. Turning around, I saw Ryan smiling brightly.
Tom, I can't thank you enough. Because you let go of Ashley, I got to meet my beloved wife and son.
With that, Ryan hung up the phone.
Oliver has gone to sleep, and I cut in.
"It's okay. Thank you," I told him with a smile, and Ryan blushed slightly. Soon after, Tom contacted me again.
He's really my son, isn't he?
"That's why I told you. Children weren't possible with you."
So you were cheating with Ryan. How dare you betray me? I will never forgive you.
Tom's words made me sigh in disbelief. He really had the nerve to accuse others. "Wasn't it you who cheated?"
What?
Yes, Tom had an affair. Linda, thinking her infertile daughter-in-law was the reason for the lack of grandchildren, went off the rails and decided a woman who had children before would be suitable. And so, she summoned Tom to the family home and set him up on a blind date.
Why do you know about that?
The woman from the blind date told me. This had happened right after I divorced Tom. A letter addressed to me had arrived at my parents' house, detailing the blind date. She seems to be the neighbor's single mother. Linda told her that her son had been abandoned by a terrible wife and introduced her to Tom. Tom took a liking to her at first sight and, pretending to visit his family home, went on multiple dates with her. Just when she was considering marriage, you and I divorced. Linda, happy to have me out of the way, told her the troublemaker was gone. Linda had carelessly spoken, making the blind date realize my existence. At the same time, the woman realized she had been deceived. There's no fault on her part. She was under the impression you were single. But you were different. You cheated on her while still married to me.
Well, you cheated on me too.
The matchmaker sincerely apologized, saying, "Even though I didn't know he was married, I'm really sorry. I was in a hurry to get a father for my child." I started seeing Ryan after we divorced. The day I left that house, Ryan confessed his feelings to me.
I've always loved you, Ashley.
He said, and though confused, I started dating Ryan. Soon after, we were blessed with Oliver, and we got married. I'm not like you. I don't cause trouble for others.
How would you know that for sure?
Then you should check into it. Maybe we should take it to court? This sudden mention of court made Tom fall silent.
Hold on. Why court?
Because I'm going to sue you for damages for the affair. If you think I've been unfaithful, why don't you sue me? With that, Tom cursed and hung up the phone. Such a selfish man. Then I heard Oliver crying, and I put down my phone to go to him. "Oh, Ryan, thank you."
I'm his dad. It's the least I can do.
When I got to Oliver, Ryan was already holding and comforting him. I thanked him, and he smiled kindly. Ryan also works from home, and now we are both able to raise Oliver together. If I were still with Tom, we could never have raised a child together like this.
Yeah, but Ashley, now that you're my wife, could you please not mention other men so much?
His cute jealousy made me smile again. "Oh, sorry."
I'll watch Oliver. Why don't you take a break?
"Thank you. I'll take you up on that," Ryan said, slightly embarrassed by his own suggestion. I thanked him and decided to rest. I have to visit the lawyer tomorrow. Soon after, I filed a claim for compensation with Tom through my lawyer. Thanks to the blind date who had given us solid evidence, we were able to successfully receive compensation from Tom. Nice weather. It's a great day for a walk.
That's true.
One day, I was walking in the park nearby with Ryan and Oliver.
I'll go buy some drinks.
Thank you. As Ryan went to get drinks, I picked up Oliver. And just as I was smiling at Ryan coming toward us,
Watch out.
a sudden impact from behind made me fall. I instinctively protected Oliver, but he slipped from my arms. Oliver,
I'm taking my son back.
It's nice to finally meet my grandson.
when I looked up, there was Linda holding Oliver with Tom by her side. They started to run away with him.
Wait.
Stay out of the way.
Ryan chased after them as Tom tried to block him. As Linda escaped, I tried to stand up. Ouch! My foot hurts and I can't run. It seems I injured it when I fell. Oliver! Oliver!
What are you doing?
Hey, let go.
Passersby who noticed our distress restrained Linda. One of the women protected Oliver, who was crying, and brought him to me. My Oliver.
I'm so relieved.
You and your baby should go to the hospital. While thanking her, I looked at Tom and Linda. They were already being held down, yelling, "Let go and give back my grandchild."
The police have already been notified.
Thank you so much.
Leaving the scene to the bystanders, we headed to the hospital. It turned out I had sprained my ankle. Oliver was unharmed, just exhausted from crying.
You've been through a lot. I'm sorry for the trouble, but could you tell us what happened?
After that, I was questioned by the police and explained the situation to my parents, who had contacted me. Eventually, the police explained why Tom and Linda had done what they did.
My mom told me to. I just followed her orders.
Tom reportedly said during his interrogation. Meanwhile, Linda was yelling at the police, "I was just taking back my grandchild." It seems that after the blind date fled and word got out to relatives about me, the two of them were left without support. Linda's thinking spiraled out of control, blaming everything on me. "It's all Ashley's fault. That child is really Tom's. She lied and stole my grandchild." And then to track us down and try to kidnap Oliver.
What terrible people.
Who would have thought it would come to this? After discussing it, we decided to move far away. Being able to work from home really helped during this time.
I'll protect you two this time. I won't let them near us again.
Ryan said, choosing a place with high security. Still, it would be a while before we could feel safe. But we won't let people like that defeat us. This time, I will protect Oliver thoroughly. I won't let him experience such fear again. From now on, I'll make sure Oliver can live smiling. That's the vow I made in my heart. By the way, I got a message from that woman. I've been in occasional contact with the blind date. I helped her escape from Tom as a way to thank her for giving us the evidence of the affair. She apologized for causing trouble because she had to flee.
She's not to blame at all.
As Ryan said, there's nothing wrong with her. In fact, she apologized more than necessary, saying she had hurt me by having an affair. I plan to tell her about Tom and then cut off contact.
That's a good idea. It's better for both of you to forget and be free.
I nodded in agreement with Ryan's words. Later, I learned that Tom and Linda were arrested for attempted kidnapping. As a result, Tom was fired from his job.
Even if they're free, they can't chase after us anymore.
Tom had already lost his savings paying me a settlement for the divorce. In order to find us, they went into debt and hired a detective.
It seems they borrowed money from shady places. They're probably waiting for Tom and Linda to show up now.
If that's the case, they won't be able to reach us here. We are currently overseas. We chose to move away from the US just to be safe.
Now we can raise Oliver without worries.
He said, and I nodded with a smile. It seems things turned out just as Ryan predicted for Tom and Linda. Somehow, after getting released, Tom was immediately taken away by some debt collectors. As for Linda, she was let go. But after this incident, she's been shunned by everyone around and can't find work anywhere.
They had to sell their house to pay off the debts. Well, that wasn't enough, so they sold almost everything they had, and now they're living under a bridge in a cardboard box.
My mom told me from the US. I smiled genuinely, relieved at the self-inflicted outcome they faced, and that we can now focus on Oliver's growth without worry.
Well, I guess I'll get some work done.
Ryan said, stretching. His profession is a children's book author, the same as my dad.
I have to create a children's book that Oliver will enjoy too, just like John did for me.
My dad doted on Ryan, who grew up without a father, and often read him the books he wrote. That inspired Ryan to become a children's book author. You will definitely create books that everyone will love.
Thank you. I'll make sure it comes true.
Seeing his reliable smile made my heart skip a beat.
Huh? Something wrong?
Nothing. I was just thinking how wonderful my husband is. Laughing, I said that, causing Ryan to blush and exclaim, "Hot." Though he's grown much taller and surpassed me in presence long ago, in moments like this, he hasn't changed since he was a child. Ryan, thank you for speaking to me that day.
I should be thanking you. Honestly, I felt a bit guilty.
Ryan admitted he felt guilty for taking advantage of my vulnerable state.
I wondered if you could truly be happy with someone you didn't originally love.
Well, if you're looking for a symbol of happiness, he's right here, I said, lifting Oliver, who giggled joyfully. Ryan smiled happily at the sight. Years later,
Grandpa, Grandma.
Long time no see, Oliver.
You've grown again.
we returned to the US for a long vacation. Oliver ran up to my parents with a beaming smile, and they warmly welcomed him.
By the way, I heard your book won an award.
Right. Thank you.
Recently, one of his books was well received and won an award. And now there are plans to make it into a movie.
I can't be outdone.
No way. I still can't beat John.
Ryan said, laughing with my dad. Meanwhile, I have also resumed working now that Oliver has grown up. Fortunately, I still receive requests from overseas, ensuring we have a sufficient income. I won't be outdone either. I joined in the conversation, and my dad jokes, "We're all rivals here," to which Oliver added, "Me too," with a smile. Let's keep this family full of smiles and laughter. I made that vow in my heart.
You've been living abroad for so long, there's no point in getting property in the States, right? It's enough for you to have our grandparents' old house.
After my mother passed away, I returned to my home country for her funeral, only to find out that my sister had already decided on the inheritance distribution without consulting with me. There were no room for me to say my opinion, and I was given the old house that our grandparents used to live in. When I went to see it, it was in no condition to be inhabited. Even if I wanted to dispose of it, it seemed like it would cost a considerable amount of money. However, I started cleaning it up because it was a house that my mother cherished from our grandparents. And there, I found something unbelievable. I am in my 40s and married. My husband got a job overseas, and I accompanied him. I can work from anywhere as long as there is an internet connection, so I didn't hesitate to go with him. I currently work as a freelancer. I have one sister, and she is also married and has family of her own. My sister's husband works in the countryside, so they enjoyed living in the suburbs, which was closer to his workplace. After both my sister and I got married, our parents were still in good health for a while, but a few years ago, our father passed away. My parents had a very good relationship, and my mother, who lost her husband, became depressed and felt sick. Ideally, my sister and I should have discussed what to do with our mother, but my sister took action on her own. My sister and I never got along from a young age, and we had never cooperated on anything. My sister left her husband behind in the countryside and returned to our family home alone. Effectively, my sister's husband lived away from home for work. My sister started living with my mother in the family home. It might be normal for me to offer financial support since I couldn't return home, but we had not talked to each other at all even for my father's funeral. I've heard nothing about my mother and sister living together. While the relationship between the sisters was not good, my sister and mother did not have any conflicts. As long as they were getting along fine, I refrained from contacting them. However, my mother's depression worsened, and she fell ill, eventually passing away. I rushed back to my home country to attend the funeral. I should have seen her again while she was still healthy. I cannot help regretting not returning to my home country and living with my mother. Even though it was only a short time since the funeral, my sister brought a lawyer and started talking about the inheritance.
You're living overseas, so you don't need the inheritance, right? I took care of Mom until the end. You know what I mean, don't you?
It seemed like my sister already knew the amount of property left by our mother. Seeing that she had a lawyer with her, I thought she wouldn't let me regut.
But if I take everything, my public image gets worse, right? So I'll give you the old house where our grandparents used to live.
That was referring to the house that had been more than 100 years old, where our grandparents had lived. I remembered my mother taking over the management of it after our grandparents passed away. However, I had never been directly informed about it by my mother. According to the lawyer, it seemed that my mother, who lost her husband and became depressed, did not actively manage the house. So the lawyer suggested that I could abandon it because I couldn't understand the situation. Maybe the lawyer is exaggerating to make me abandon it. Although I had suspicions like that, no matter how bad the condition was, if it was a house that my mother had managed as long as her health allowed, I decided to accept my sister's proposal and take over. This was the only inheritance I received. In contrast, my sister inherited the family home, land, and all of my mother's savings. The house I inherited was a typical American style, and it is a place where I used to come and play often during my childhood, running around in the natural surroundings and playing hide and seek. Even though I didn't get along with my sister, we used to visit there quite often, but she hated our grandparents' house. She detested the old-fashioned countryside surrounding with bugs. Furthermore, our grandparents' house was dimly lit even during the day, and it was packed with stuff, which made it spooky, so she didn't want to get close to it. For me, there are only good memories, but for my sister, it was a place she didn't want to get close, so I assumed she pushed it onto me. I thought so since the condition of the house was way too worse than I expected because quite some time had passed since my mother couldn't manage it anymore. First of all, the surrounding weeds were taller than me. These weeds blocked my view, and there were overgrown branches and roots that obstructed my path, making it difficult for me to even get inside. Without checking the condition of the house, I could easily estimate the extent of its deterioration. Still, I need to check thoroughly. Is it in a condition that can be preserved? Can it be repaired? Or is it so dilapidated that it would be a nuisance to the neighbors if not demolished? I initially thought I could handle it by my own hand, but I was completely helpless. I cannot imagine how much time and effort to take by myself. Anyway, I entrusted a contractor to remove the overgrown weeds and trees obstructing my way so that I could at least reach inside of the house. A few days later, I received a message saying that the removal of the designated areas was completed. I headed back to my grandparents' house and was finally able to see the house itself. The exterior was not in good condition, so I realized that it had to be demolished without consulting experts. The inside was worse than the impression I got from the exterior. The carpets were worn out, there were holes in the roof, rain had leaked through and damaged the carpets and floorboards. There were even places that creaked loudly under my weight, making it difficult to thoroughly inspect every room. At a glance, it seemed like the items inside the house had been organized compared to my childhood memories. I'm sure my mother gradually organized the items inside the house after inheriting it until she got sick. Still, there were many pieces of furniture and small items left behind. Although I thought it would be fine as it was, since I planned to demolish it, I decided to clean it up as much as possible. When I consulted a contractor, they said it would take several days at the earliest, or maybe more, even a few weeks. They said that the surrounding trees were obstructing the entry of heavy machinery, so we needed to start with that. So, during the weeks leading up to the demolition, I decided to visit my grandparents' house as much as possible on sunny days. One day, while cleaning around the kitchen, something interesting happened. It seemed like no one had touched the items around the kitchen, as many cooking utensils and dishes remained as they were. There were no food items left, of course, but there were some unopened seasonings that had passed their expiration dates. I wondered if there might be something in the storage space under the floor. As expected, a fermentation crock jar emerged when I opened it. My grandmother used to make pickles often. Especially her homemade shiso plum pickles were super good, and there was a time when she sent them to me regularly, even after I stopped visiting her. I couldn't believe that there were still pickles left. I tried to lift the jar cautiously, but it was quite heavy. Moreover, it seemed certain that something was inside. Could it be that there are actually pickles inside? I nervously opened the jar, and various gold items came out. There were documents with them, and it turned out that they had been purchased with the money our grandparents obtained from selling the land. While I inherited my grandparents' house, should I also take the gold items inside the house? Since it seemed like a dispute might arise if I told my sister, I decided to consult with my mother's sister, my aunt. According to my aunt, it was true that our grandparents had sold part of the land where our ancestors had inherited for generations. The only remaining land was the one where our grandparents' house was built. My aunt had her own health issues, and she couldn't handle the family home, so she entrusted everything to me because I was the one who inherited it. Regarding the gold items, she said she would give them to me as a fee for the trouble and inconvenience, which might happen by leaving everything entirely to me. In fact, it would cost several $10,000 to demolish the old house. Since saying I'll pay for it from the money I earn by selling the land wouldn't work, I decided to accept my aunt's proposal. Now, since the price of gold is soaring, so there will be some money left even after allocating funds for the demolition costs, removal of surrounding weeds, and disposal of unwanted items inside. As expected, when I exchanged it for cash, they bought it for an amount higher than I had anticipated. I used the funds for the house demolition expenses, clearing the surrounding weeds, and disposing of the unwanted items inside. On the day of the demolition, I decided to see through it until the end. For me, it held childhood memories of my grandparents, but for my aunt, it was the house where she was born and raised. While standing beside me, my aunt softly said, "I'm sorry for letting it deteriorate like this." "Not at all. I'm sure Grandpa, Grandma, and Mom would be thankful that you were here till the end," I told her. "I'm glad it was you, my niece, who inherited it in the end," she responded. I felt relieved that I could fulfill what my mother had left undone. Once everything was settled, I returned to my husband waiting overseas. Then, a year after my mother passed away, my husband and I returned to our home country for her first memorial service. It was the first time I had seen my sister since the one-sided discussion about the inheritance. After finishing the event, my sister asked me, what happened to the shabby house? I explained to her that I had it demolished and turned into an empty lot because I thought I didn't need to hide the truth from her. The land where my grandparents' house had stood turned out to be quite spacious once it was cleared, and we found a buyer promptly. However, my sister's expression changed. She said, "I haven't heard of it."
I didn't hear about any of this. If you've any cash by selling it, you should give me half. If I had known that this shabby house could be worth something, I wouldn't have let you inherit it.
Certainly, if we only consider the run-down condition of the house, it wouldn't have been worth much. It became valuable only after I invested a significant amount in turning it into an empty lot. However, I didn't mention that we had cashed in the gold items left by our grandparents and used that money for the expenses. If I did, she would undoubtedly ask for a share of that too. I firmly rejected my sister's demand. It was such unequal inheritance from the beginning. I didn't see any reason to split the funds I had earned by selling it, especially since it was a result of my efforts. If she insisted on splitting it in half, I suggested that she should first hand over half of the inheritance she had received to me. But my sister seemed to despise my opinion and began to blame me, saying, "You are such a greedy miser. You acted selfishly by demolishing and selling the property without any permission." She insisted I earned the cash unfairly. My aunt defended me, saying that she had requested to stay at the family home until the end. Being in a clear position on my side, my aunt strongly counted my sister. My sister, enraged by this, exclaimed, "Outsiders should step back, don't interfere in the sisters' conversation," and forcefully pushed her. My aunt stumbled and fell. I told my sister, "How could you do that?" But she shifted the blame onto me, saying that I had acted recklessly. She even suggested, "The fallen old woman is an obstacle. Why don't the two couples, sisters and husbands, discuss together?" We ended up in a separate room, where my husband and I faced my sister and her husband. Initially, my husband explained how I had dedicated myself to managing our family affairs after my mother passed away. Leaving my husband behind in the overseas for an extended period due to work commitments, I stayed in New York alone until the sale of the vacant lot was completed. Fortunately, we found a buyer sooner than expected, but if not, I would have had to return home more frequently. While my job allows me to work from anywhere as long as I have an internet connection and a computer, it's not as easy as having things go my way all the time. There were also time differences to communicate with my husband, so to be honest, it wasn't easy. My husband also told my sister about the considerable initial investment I had made in preparing the vacant lot. He didn't disclose the source of the funds, but made it clear that if she insisted on splitting everything in half, we should also divide the incurred expenses equally. Furthermore, he argued that the discussion should have started from that point, and that we had no intention of handing over half of the proceeds from the sale of the land. My sister had already received an inheritance greater than the selling price of my land. I asked her, "What more do you want?" Our mother's inheritance hadn't been divided equally. It might be difficult to divide the land equally, but couldn't she at least have split our mother's savings equally? I also revealed my true feelings, admitting that I would have been willing to discuss things further if she had expressed dissatisfaction with the amount after splitting. In response, my sister's husband asked, "By the way, how much did my wife inherit?" My husband and I were so surprised that we asked, "Oh." My sister apparently hadn't informed her husband of the amount she had inherited. When my sister's husband found out the amount, he was shocked and asked her, "What on earth did you spend that enormous sum on?" It seemed that he knew nothing about the money, and the money had already been spent. I couldn't believe that such a large sum could disappear in just a year or so. Of course, if she had used it to purchase a house, I could understand to some extent, but after our mother's death, my sister had returned to her husband's place, where he lived for work. If she had made a major purchase like a house, her husband would have already questioned her to find out the source of the funds. At first, my sister was trying to make the conversation muddy, change the topic, and deceive, but she confessed that she spent the money to repay her debt because she seemed to be felt fear when her husband, who usually looks gentle, pressing Gare for answer with banding a table. Furthermore, since she still had an outstanding debt to repay, it appeared she desperately wanted the proceeds from the sale of the land that I had obtained. How much is the outstanding debt that couldn't be repaid with that inheritance amount? Upon closer examination, it became clear that she had incurred significant debts through illegal gambling, to the extent that it was almost enough to buy a house. The illegal interest was added to the unpaid debts day by day, making it impossible to handle. She begged for help. My sister was, in fact, a housewife, and had not worked part-time or anything of the sort. I wondered how she managed to come up with such a large amount of money. Of course, her husband questioned her harshly about this. It was then revealed that she had been using the savings they had as a couple. When her husband found out that she had been using their savings without telling him and the couple's savings account was emptied, he became furious. He grabbed my sister and pushed her down. My sister resisted, scratching her own husband with her nails. It escalated into a little scuffle, so our family members, who were in another room, came to break them up. Then my aunt said to my sister, "You've been often returning to your parents' house and taking valuable items with you, haven't you? Your mother knew about it." She then presented a letter with our mother's handwriting, saying, "Besides, she asked you to contact Emily because she wanted to her my other daughter before it's too late, but you never did. Why is this letter coming up now?" My aunt explained that she had initially intended to keep this matter to herself, hoping that my sister would reconsider her actions and start her life over again after having all inheritance. However, she couldn't bear my sister's selfish thoughts of taking even more, rather than turning her life around, even after having monopolized the inheritance. In front of the relatives, my aunt also revealed this incident, hoping that my sister would realize how terrible her actions were. Among the items my sister had taken and converted into cash, there were also family treasure that our mother cherished. Shortly thereafter, my sister's husband gave a divorce paper to my sister. He threatened to demand the entire amount she had spent if she didn't accept divorce. However, immediately afterward, she received legal documents requesting consolation in money. It turned out that the debt, which was originally incurred through risky gambling, had been borrowed from a very dangerous source, and no matter where my sister went, she was pursued by them. My sister, who had never really worked, started a part-time job, but it seemed she couldn't repay the debt through such work, and she was being threatened to take on a risky and profitable job. However, if she did it, she would end up with a criminal record. My sister's financial recklessness was entirely her own fault. As she couldn't manage her spending, she has only herself to blame. With my husband's job being relocated within New York, I returned home. We used the money from the land sale to buy a house, and we live happily together as a couple. Work is going well, and my aunt occasionally comes to check on us. Recently, she's been feeling better and regaining her health. I can only hope that this happiness continues indefinitely.
That small-town factory seems to be worth more than we thought.
I thought it was plain, but maybe I made a mistake. If that's the case, maybe I should have taken a job at that factory. With family connections, promotion would be certain.
When I returned home from the funeral, I was shocked to hear my husband and son talking. I work at the small factory my father ran, but my husband and son, who work at a large trading company, always seem to look down on it. However, after seeing the large number of people who attended my father's funeral, their attitudes changed. I can't stand the thought of them taking a job at the factory we have worked so hard to protect just for fun. Moreover, it is a big mistake to be sure of your career because you're a relative. There are people who make their living at that company, and those who take pride in their work. I can't allow those people to be insulted because of me. With quiet determination, I packed my belongings. I will never come back to this house again. My name is Nancy Wilson. I was born and raised as the only daughter of a small-town factory owner. My husband's name is Robert Wilson. He was a salesman for a trading company, and we got married about 30 years ago, having a son named Mark. Mark, influenced by his father, grew up to be a sociable and cheerful child. Rather than just cheerful, he is more like flashy and showy. Before getting married, I found those traits of Robert fresh and attractive, but once married and seeing Mark grow up the same way, I feel like I'm the only one with a different sense and feel out of place. What's more concerning is Robert and Mark's sense of money. Both of them are big spenders, often straining our household finances. We've had numerous arguments over this, but we've never been able to see eye to eye, and here we are. However, I never expected that this dissatisfaction would turn into such a big deal. I have been working at the factory run by my father, Edward, since I was young. I've been there for so long that now I'm entrusted with the position of executive director. My father wants my son Mark to help with the factory management, but young and flashy Mark seems more interested in sales at the trading company than in our factory.
I like talking to people, and I think I'm suited for sales.
But I know that Mark, who said that to my father, secretly despises the factory, saying, "I hate the dull small-town factory." My father seemed to sense Mark's feelings, and after that, he stopped talking to Mark about the factory. It was hard to see my father looking so sad, but neither Robert nor Mark had any interest in factory management, and had always looked down on our small factory as a mere subcontractor. It doesn't feel good to have the factory that my father and I cherish so much looked down upon. But I had given up on trying to change Robert's flashy mindset, knowing we thought differently.
This time, I'm going on a tour with some friends. I'm thinking of taking Mark with me, so I'm going to buy a motorcycle.
What? But motorcycles are expensive, aren't they? Are you buying it?
Why don't you chip in half?
Since both of us work, we have an agreement to split living expenses, but we can spend our own earnings freely. That's so sudden. When I showed reluctance, Robert raised his eyebrows.
He's a salesman too, so networking is important. It's for Mark, so it's fine.
All right, but besides the motorcycle, why don't you sometimes take Mark to see his grandfather? His health hasn't been great lately, and he might need a short hospital stay. Seeing Mark might cheer him up. My father, despite running the company energetically, couldn't escape the effects of aging and had been going in and out of the hospital recently for short stays and tests. My mother passed away a few years ago, so I worry about my father living alone. But when I express my concerns, Robert gives a half-hearted response.
Oh, right. It's tough right now because I'm busy, but maybe sometime soon.
I'm talking about Mark. Lately, whenever I point out something to Robert, he quickly becomes irritable. This time was no different, and he immediately glared at me.
Stop nagging. We talk about work because we're both in sales. I need to pass on my know-how to him.
I have recently started to think that they both just want to have fun. Robert has always used work as an excuse to be away from home, leaving me to handle most of the childcare and housework alone. Mark, having grown up watching his father, often says outdated things like that's just how men are. I'm worried about whether Mark will ever be able to get married with this attitude.
Anyway, that's it. About the motorcycle, I'm counting on you.
Well, okay. Later, I found out that Mark had secretly visited my father.
Mark suddenly showed up at my house. I thought something was up, but he just asked for money. He said he wanted to buy a motorcycle helmet.
My father told me this in a casual conversation, and I was at my wit's end. I can't believe it. Robert told me to chip in for Mark's motorcycle.
Mark said he'd buy the helmet himself. But he's my adorable grandson, so I gave him the money.
Like many grandparents, my father is doting on his grandson. But as I see him become more self-indulgent with age, I'm beginning to reach my limit. I am fed up with my son's selfishness, even though he is my own child. The same goes for Robert, whom I married out of love. Robert never helped with housework or childcare, using his work as his excuse to have fun. Back then, my mother was still around, and my workplace was understanding, so I managed, but now, I feel my love for him fading.
Nancy, I'm sorry, but I have to be hospitalized again. Please take care of the company.
Okay, I will. Honestly, I have started thinking about our divorce. As for the factory, I can't rely on Mark, and he probably doesn't want to take over. It might be better to find someone, regardless of blood relation, to take over. I'll talk to my father after his hospitalization. I'm sure he'll agree. Since my father was hospitalized, my days have been busy with my work and caregiving. Work is manageable with the help of my colleagues. It's busy, but thinking about standing proud when my father returns keeps me going. The problem is caregiving. Robert and Mark still use work as their excuse and don't visit the hospital. Ever since I scolded Mark for asking my father for pocket money, he's been sulking. Robert supports Mark in this. It's heartbreaking that even though they are both adults, they only visit my father to ask for pocket money, and it makes me want to cry. Did I raise him the wrong way?
Nancy, you shouldn't say that. You've done your best. Don't worry too much.
My father, weakened both physically and emotionally by his hospitalization, comforted me. In moments like these, I deeply feel my father's greatness. I was very frustrated that Robert and Mark didn't respect my father.
I might not be able to leave the hospital this time.
Dad, don't say things like that. My voice was almost a scream. I had suspected it. And the company is running smoothly without my father. It's thanks to him that he had anticipated this situation and distributed the work accordingly.
Well, I'm old now. I've made preparations and I'm ready. I'm leaving the company to you. Even if I get discharged, I will retire.
Dad, I couldn't say anything more. My father had worked hard on the front lines for many years. And just as he had declared, he never left the hospital. My father passed away a month later. It was a peaceful end. I felt like I had lost my only ally in the world, and I clung to my father and cried for a while. But I couldn't just stand still. I had to do what needed to be done. Everyone at the company was willing to help. The problem was, unsurprisingly, Robert and Mark.
Edward passed away?
That's unfortunate.
Looking at their sad faces, I thought, they didn't even visit him. Swallowing my words, I proceeded with his funeral preparations.
Why do we need such a large hall? A private family funeral should be enough.
Yeah, let's just say our goodbyes among ourselves.
People from the company and our business partners are coming. We can't do that. You always say that networking is important for work. When I showed them the plan I discussed with the hall manager, Robert and Mark were displeased. It was laughable for people who didn't visit him to suggest a private funeral. They probably just didn't want to spend the money. Even though it wasn't their money, it was really frustrating.
He's just the president of a small town factory. There's no way that many people will come.
Yeah, it's a shabby factory. Why are you showing off like this?
What did you say? When I raised my eyebrows, Mark realized his mistake and awkwardly looked away. I knew they looked down on the factory, but this was the first time they had explicitly called it shabby. They grew up and thrived on the money from that shabby factory, even getting pocket money at 25 years old. How did they end up like this?
Anyway, I oppose it. We don't need such a large-scale funeral.
What do you know? You don't know anything about the company.
I'm a salesman at a major company. I've attended more events like this than you. I know better.
Robert didn't say it as clearly as Mark, but it was obvious he also looked down on the factory. His face turned red as he glared at me irritably.
Even if there's not enough money, I won't contribute a cent. It's your fault for being so showy.
I was dumbfounded by his words, considering how many times he had asked me for money for things like motorcycles and golf, claiming they were necessary for work. How many times had he asked me to support his career? The money I had gradually given each time has now amounted to a significant sum. It's enough to cover the scale of the funeral he's now opposing. Don't worry, the company will handle the funeral, and if there's any shortfall, I'll cover it myself.
Do whatever you want.
You always tell me not to waste money, but now you're spending it on this.
Mark also seemed upset that I was going to pay for it. Does he think his parents' money is his own? Your grandfather was the president. This is not a waste.
Mark, there's no point in arguing. Let's go.
I'm the one who feels it's pointless to argue. Robert and Mark glared at me with disdain before leaving. They were probably off to have fun somewhere, claiming it was for work. They said they would attend the funeral, so I had no choice but to ignore everything else. Once they stopped interfering with the funeral arrangements, everything proceeded smoothly. Things were a bit awkward at home, but I was too busy to worry about it. I did the minimum housework, but my time was fully occupied with preparing for the funeral and work. On the day of the funeral, Robert and Mark's eyes widened when they saw the attendees.
So many people showed up.
There are politicians and even celebrities here.
Isn't that David, the president of Dad's company?
The hall I had prepared was filled with people. It was unexpected for Robert and Mark, who had belittled the small factory. Robert spotted David, the president of his company, and hurried to greet him.
Hi, David, thank you for attending. I'm Robert from the sales department.
What? Oh, I see. My condolences. I'm saddened by the loss of such a remarkable man.
You're too kind.
As Robert finished speaking, David ended the conversation and walked toward me. Robert watched in surprise as David walked away.
You must be having a tough time with your father's passing. Will you be taking over the factory?
I can't say for sure until I see my father's will, but that's my intention.
I see. You should be fine. We'll support you. Edward was a great help to us.
Robert and Mark couldn't understand why David, the president of a large trading company, was speaking to me as an equal. However, the moment I mentioned my father's will, their expressions changed. With a sense of unease, I shared memories of my father with the people who attended the funeral. The funeral was over, and I was busy with the cleanup. Mark and Robert eagerly left first, without even pretending to help. Considering that from the start, I was the only family member involved in the preparations, it was natural, but there was a strange sense of weariness. There's still plenty to do, so please continue helping from tomorrow.
Sure, Nancy.
Nancy, please rest early today as well.
I thanked the employees who had helped and left the funeral hall. Cleanup finished earlier than planned, and as I headed home today, I thought I'd take it easy for the first time in a while. Hi, I'm home. I called out, but there was no reply. I wondered if they were still upset about the funeral, but the voices coming from the living room sounded strangely off. I wondered what was happening and decided to listen in. Mark and Robert were having an excited conversation.
That small town factory seems to be worth more than we thought.
I thought it was plain, but maybe I made a mistake. If that's the case, maybe I should have taken a job at that factory. With family connections, promotion would be certain.
As their words became clearer, I couldn't close my open mouth. They were playing around by getting employed at the factory and the company we've been desperately protecting. Moreover, it is a big mistake to be sure of your career because you're a relative.
Yeah, exactly. It's because we're family that a woman like Mom became the executive director. The employees would definitely prefer a man as the president, wouldn't they?
Their words belittled both me and the company, making my body tremble with anger.
Women taking maternity and childcare leave and still getting promoted must be nice. Men work themselves to the bone without those breaks and still can't get ahead.
Maternity and childcare leave are nothing like the breaks they imagine. It's like doing another job while away from the company. I realized how badly I had failed in raising Mark. I never thought he would grow up to be so narrow-minded and outdated. Moreover, he looks down on his own mother and even mocks me.
Well, it's not too late. You could say you're helping Mom and switch jobs. It'll all be yours eventually anyway.
Mark turned out this way largely because of Robert's influence. He never helped with childcare or housework, but was always eager to spend money on expensive hobbies for Mark. This hasn't changed since Mark was a child.
That's true. Next president does have a nice ring to it. I'll talk to Mom.
Their comfortable lives were built on my sacrifices. It was the moment I clearly realized something I'd been avoiding thinking about. If things continued like this, they would keep trampling on me. Moreover, Robert and Mark were about to trample on the factory and company that my parents, the employees, and I had worked so hard to protect. Many people make a living working there, and many find fulfillment in their jobs. I couldn't let my mistake harm the employees. Quietly making up my mind, I walked past the living room where the two men were chatting and laughing. Since there were plans to stay overnight while preparing for the funeral, my belongings were already somewhat packed. Maybe it was because I secretly wanted the divorce with Robert. I didn't need to pack anything further. I could leave immediately. 3 seconds later, I walked out of the house. Neither Robert nor Mark noticed. Without looking back, I got into my car. It was convenient, so I decided to return to my father's house where he had lived alone. It's too full of memories to sell, and it has plenty of space. Though it feels too big for one person, my father was a well-known figure in the town, and many people didn't want the house to be sold. I had already prepared to live there since I often stayed over when my father's health was poor. I sent the divorce papers to our old house. The day after I left, I received an overwhelming number of calls from Robert. Hello.
Nancy, where are you right now?
The sudden loud noise on the phone made me frown. Where? At my parents' house. Haven't the divorce papers arrived yet?
Divorce papers? What are you talking about? I haven't heard anything.
Robert was clearly flustered. He must be worried about losing his source of money. I sighed deeply. Our different senses of money have become too hard to ignore lately. Now that Mark is grown, it's fine, right? You two enjoy yourselves.
What? Are you kidding me? No, let's talk this through. I'll change whatever I need to.
For once, he wasn't yelling angrily. Seeing me as a source of money, he tried to flatter me with a forced, gentle voice. Mark was the same way.
Mom, it's too much to leave suddenly. Please come back. We're family, right? Let's talk.
Mark, you're already 25. You should be able to manage without me. It's time to stand on your own.
Standing on my own and you leaving are two different things. It's lonely to break up the family, regardless of independence.
He was unusually meek, unlike his usual arrogant self. They always left everything at home to me while they played around. On top of that, they looked down on my job and me, acting as if they were superior. Now, suddenly, they were talking about loneliness, family, and wanting to talk things out. Thinking they were eyeing my father's company behind their pleas made me sick. However, I was living at my parents' house. They know the address of my parents' house, so if I push them away here, they will just show up at the house anyway. After thinking it over, I decided to talk to them. All right, but keep in mind that I want to divorce you.
Oh, okay. Let's just talk first.
Robert and Mark underestimated me. They were salesmen, confident in their persuasion skills, and thought they could easily talk me out of it in person. They can think that way for now. I am completely fed up with them. To completely sever ties with the two of them, I began preparing for the discussion. The meeting took place 3 days later. It was rare for Robert and Mark, who usually claim to be busy with work and quickly leave the house, to immediately agree to a discussion. I had hoped for about a week to prepare, but they wouldn't allow it. They were likely planning to gang up on me and talk me out of it. They probably thought that if they gave me a week, I'd talk to others and gain some advice. In fact, that was my plan. But if I couldn't prepare alone, I'd find another way. In reality, I had already been preparing since I mentioned wanting a divorce. It was just a matter of speeding up the plan, which posed no problem for me. I brought a lawyer with me.
Nice to meet you. I look forward to working with you today.
This lawyer had helped us a lot with the company. He is the most well-known lawyer in the area and is also very strong in divorce cases. Robert and Mark seemed intimidated at the mention of a lawyer.
Wait, hold on. Isn't this a bit too aggressive, bringing a lawyer to a family discussion?
His strained laugh was pitiful. His voice was shaking, clearly more flustered than he appeared. I told you, I want to divorce you. If you aren't willing to agree, this is quite normal.
Mom, do you really want to cut ties with us that badly?
Mark looked at me with a sad expression. Before, this might have swayed me, but after hearing their conversation in the living room, I found that I felt no love for either Robert or Mark. That's right. I obviously want to sever ties with someone who thinks they can get promoted just because they're family in the company that my parents, the employees, and I have worked so hard to protect.
What?
Mark turned bright red and fell silent. He never imagined I had overheard that conversation. How naive, even though I left that day. They had no suspicion at all.
Why would you?
Oh, you didn't even notice I had come back. You were so engrossed in your conversation. That was the final straw. I don't want either of you to have anything to do with that company. Robert seemed to want to say something, but couldn't find the words. At that moment, the lawyer handed Robert some documents.
Since the beginning of your marriage, you have been asking Nancy for money, claiming it was for work. Nancy has meticulously documented the amounts, purposes, and dates of these transactions. We would like you to repay this total amount. If you agree, there will be no alimony claims.
What? Money.
Robert snatched the documents and stared at them in disbelief. The amount was almost the same as what he had grudgingly agreed to spend on the funeral.
But this. Yes. What about the money for Mark? Isn't that child support?
I was disgusted by his pathetic excuses. They were truly greedy people. The money given to Mark after he became an adult and started working isn't child support. But the money you claimed was for him has been excluded from this total. And this is the remaining amount. Robert's face turned pale as he glared at the documents. He looked like he couldn't believe it. Apparently, he had no idea how much money he had actually spent. You've always wanted to buy expensive shoes, suits, and watches, claiming it was for sales. Every time, you asked me to help and said it was for work. I always said I was just lending you the money.
But we're married, so helping each other is.
I don't remember you ever helping me. Robert never helped with housework or raising Mark. Unfortunately, there are no witnesses, so alimony would be difficult to claim. I didn't want to deal with a prolonged court battle with him, so I gave up on alimony. Even this demand for repayment felt like a nuisance. Although the lawyer assured me he would collect the money, I didn't care about it as long as I could protect the company my father left behind. Robert fell silent, and I watched him quietly. In the silence, Mark spoke up.
If you really want a divorce, discuss it with Dad. But I'm your son, right? My ambitions for promotion and job change were just a phase. I'll change my attitude and work hard, so please forgive me.
His words were proof that he hadn't changed his mindset, but did Mark realize that? Apparently, Robert was shocked when his son betrayed him.
Mark, are you going to abandon me?
With this debt, no wonder Mom is fed up. I'm her son. Even if she wants to cut ties, she can't.
It seemed he was now considering the inheritance and decided to flatter me, abandoning his father. Like his father, he was utterly shallow. I was the one who primarily raised him, so how did he turn out like this? Where did I go wrong in raising him? Lately, these thoughts consumed me whenever I looked at him. That's true. The bond between parent and child can't be severed. Robert slumped, and Mark smiled. Robert looked like he was about to grab Mark, who was smiling. They used to be a close father and son, but money has made them like this. Selfish people are frightening. But Mark, I don't want someone who wants to be president or get promoted for such silly reasons to be involved in my father's company.
What?
Mark's face froze. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Robert frowned suspiciously.
Who could it be at a time like this?
It's a guest I invited.
What?
Robert and Mark visibly tensed up. Too much trouble to explain. I quietly stood up and invited the guest in. David, thank you for coming.
When Nancy asks, I can't say no.
David?
The visitor was David, the president of the trading company where Robert worked. He had been an acquaintance of my father's for a long time and a business partner of the factory. Although Robert only learned about it at the funeral, we had known each other for quite a while. Like the lawyer, he was more of my father's acquaintance than mine.
I heard that my employee has been causing trouble. I apologize.
No, since he is my husband, David, you don't need to worry about it. I should apologize for troubling you instead.
It's all right. Edward helped us a lot, and I hope to continue a long relationship with your company.
David smiled kindly and looked at Robert. Facing his employer, Robert straightened up, sweating profusely.
You're Robert, right? It would be a problem for someone as clueless as you to get involved with that company. I'm sorry, but could you give it up?
What? The small town factory.
Seeing Robert's surprise, David sighed deeply and shook his head. Robert, unable to assert himself in front of his boss, seemed confused about the situation.
It was fortunate for us that Edward separated his private life from work. Although, because of that, Nancy ended up marrying someone like you. It's fortunate for us that we couldn't stop the deal because of your ignorance and disrespect.
What do you mean?
Oh, and you must be Mark. You work in the sales department at Brown Trading, right? Your president wants to have a word with you. Here, the call is connected, so go ahead and talk.
Really? Oh, okay.
Just having David there changed the atmosphere of the room dramatically. With a kindly grandfatherly smile, David handed his phone to Mark. Mark's company is also a business partner of ours.
I think Mark's boss will tell him the same thing. Robert, you need to divorce Nancy.
But this is a family matter.
But you're interested in that company, right? So it's a no-go. Even if you weren't interested, it still wouldn't work. Neither you nor Mark are suited for management.
When a current president says it, it carries more weight. Robert was at a loss for words, desperately searching for a rebuttal.
You don't even know how many patents that company holds, do you? Nancy is already managing the patents. Even one of those patents is an American treasure. It's extremely valuable. I can't allow someone who would be dazzled by such value to stay near Nancy.
The talk of patents was news to Robert, who stood there, mouth agape and paralyzed. Ignoring Robert's bewilderment, David continued in a relaxed tone.
Do you understand? Mishandling just one patent could harm not just our company and Nancy's company, but America as well. I can't let someone who doesn't understand that be involved with that company.
Mark was likely hearing the same from his own boss. Seeing Robert still trying to argue, David delivered his final blow.
If you don't want to end up on the streets, stop being greedy.
It was a clear warning that further involvement would lead to their downfall. David was in a position to make that happen. The thought of the people who attended my father's funeral must have crossed their minds. If other company presidents, lawyers, politicians, and famous people shared David's views, Robert and Mark would be blown away like paper in a storm.
I understand.
Imagining his own downfall, Robert looked down and spoke weakly. Mark, having heard something similar from his own boss, also promised to no longer involve himself with me. After that, I successfully divorced and got Robert to repay the money he owed me. Robert and Mark were demoted and forced to relocate due to the recent trouble. Robert was transferred to the south, while Mark was sent far north. Moreover, they were given dead-end positions with significantly lower salaries and no prospects for promotion.
It's too risky to let them run loose. We plan to keep them employed here. Mark's boss has the same plan.
Despite the underlying fear I felt from David's words, I was grateful for his help and decided to accept it. I intend to repay this favor by supporting the company my father left behind. Freed from Robert and Mark, I dedicated myself to work and now lead a fulfilling life every day. This company was left to me by my parents. Some even call it an American treasure. The small-town factory that Robert and Mark mocked is my life's work and one of the small businesses that support America from behind the scenes. Even a single patent is considered an American treasure. With David's words in mind, I continue to work hard today.
The son and his wife who came over had clearly tense expressions on the day, and their smiles were strained.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Long time no see.
Nice to meet you, George, and congratulations on your 25th wedding anniversary.
Welcome. I'm so glad you both could come and celebrate with us today. I responded cheerfully, trying to help them relax.
Today, I've gone all out preparing the meal since you both came all this way.
Dad cooked.
But I'm not used to it, so I'm not done with the preparations yet.
While Keith sat down, accepting George's kindness despite being puzzled, Lisa headed to the kitchen where George was.
If it's still in progress, I'd be happy to help out if you don't mind.
As I wiped the table, I felt the lively atmosphere that comes with the family being together.
Well, the food's ready now. Shall we toast?
With the biggest smile yet, George offered me a glass as he spoke.
I really want Sarah, who has had it the toughest, to lead the toast.
Touched by George's kindness, I took the glass. With a pounding heart, I slowly raised my glass and took a deep breath. May this happiness last for... Mid-sentence, Lisa suddenly grabbed my hand forcefully and ran towards the entrance.
Run now.
Confused, I had no choice but to follow her due to her desperate strength. After we had left the house and walked for a while, we entered a cafe that came into view. Struggling to keep up with Lisa, I finally stopped and caught my breath, relieved.
I'm sorry for the suddenness, but this was the only way.
Lisa was shaking and turned pale as she explained the situation. George, congratulations on your long teaching career. I, Sarah Westfield, addressed my husband, George, who is 5 years my senior, with words of appreciation. Having served as a high school teacher for over 30 years, George retired this spring.
Yeah.
As usual, George responded indifferently. Relieved that he had replied, I returned to my room. Suddenly, a dusty old photograph on the desk in my room caught my eye. It was a cherished shot from our wedding, both of us looking radiant. I couldn't help but sigh. If only we could go back to those days. Back then, George was kind. He would express his gratitude and appreciation daily, eagerly ate the meals I cooked. He always accompanied me on shopping trips, carried the small bags, and made sure to check on my well-being. However, as our marriage progressed, he gradually began to comment on my household chores. At first, it was minor things like, make the omelet sweeter or vacuum daily. These were things he never mentioned in our early days, and I was puzzled. But I was pleased to think that George was finally opening up, and I happily complied. However, as time passed, his criticisms increased. When our son, Keith, started elementary school, any slight displeasure would lead to harsh reprimands, and George was just as strict with Keith.
If you have time to play, study. You're a boy. Don't cry no matter what happens.
He demanded high academic performance from Keith, who was still in elementary school, and would scold him severely if he wasn't atop of his class. This invisible violence gradually took its toll on us. George continued his reprimands, remaining mostly indifferent to household matters. When Keith reached middle school, George's violence was no longer just verbal.
Why can't you score better?
Apparently, Keith had made just one mistake in a 5-subject test. Without trying to hide his anger, George furiously tore up the test papers on the desk. Being the top of the class is quite impressive, isn't it?
It has to be perfect. Why did you only get this one wrong?
Hesitantly, I wanted to acknowledge Keith's hard work and spoke up. Everyone makes mistakes.
It's because you coddle him like that. I've been embarrassed because of you.
George raised his voice and finally raised his hand to me. All I could do was endure until George calmed down. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I kept apologizing, telling myself it was just until George calmed down. If this appeased George, he wouldn't lash out at Keith. To protect Keith, I gritted my teeth over and over. Even when Keith became a high school student, George didn't change.
What are you doing? Aren't you upset Keith lost?
That day, after Keith, who had joined the soccer team, lost a game, I was berated. It was Keith's first game, and he was picked as a freshman. That in itself is wonderful.
Don't joke. What's the point of being on the team if you lose?
With that, George slapped my left cheek hard. Holding my stinging left cheek, I desperately tried to prevent George's anger from turning towards Keith. Apparently, the other team was the top national contender, and Keith managed to score 2 goals against them.
If he can score 2, he could have scored 3.
Then he slapped my right cheek hard.
Tell him I won't tolerate another disgraceful performance next time.
George seemed satisfied after hitting both my cheeks and left with a parting shot. I will not let him lay a hand on Keith. While cooling my cheeks with ice, I kept reassuring myself. Every time Keith's grades or test results came out, George would become violent towards me.
Mom, your face.
Keith came running to me, about to cry. It'll heal quickly. I tried to force a smile not to worry Keith, but my swollen cheeks wouldn't cooperate.
It's my fault, isn't it?
No, it's not, Keith. You've done nothing wrong.
If only I had better grades. Please, Mom, stop covering for me.
His plea pained my heart. Protecting their child is a parent's job.
But I don't want to see you hurt any more because of me.
Clutching his fists, Keith strained to speak. If Dad ever hits you, and you end up all bruised, I won't be able to handle high school.
That might be true, but
life is only once. I want Keith to fully enjoy his youth in high school. I gently touched Keith's shoulder and tried to explain.
Mom, your life is only once, too.
I'm fine. Besides, Dad's attitude is just for now. He'll surely return to the kind father he once was. I smiled gently as I looked into his eyes.
I'll try even harder not to cause any trouble.
Sensing my unyielding stance, Keith spoke weakly. Just enjoy being yourself, Keith. Leave Dad to me, please. He looked me in the eyes and nodded firmly. Then, Keith enjoyed his high school life and quickly became a college applicant. Keith seemed to be choosing his college based on its proximity to home, worried about me. Don't worry about Dad.
But what about you?
I'll stay here and live with Dad. Keith looked at the marks on my arm with a face like he had swallowed a bitter bug.
Really, must you?
Yes, and you know I'm not strong, right? Too much change might be too much for me. In fact, I had always tended to get sick when traveling.
Okay.
Reluctantly, Keith conceded. Keith worked hard and successfully got into his desired university. A considerable distance away, requiring a railroad train journey. George had always been critical of Keith, but since the university was prestigious, he seemed unusually satisfied. Take care.
Mom, I'll do my best.
Keith, on the verge of tears, gripped my hand and then left for his new life. After Keith moved for college, the physical violence from George subsided, but the scolding continued.
Catching a cold again. Are you faking it? Don't roam around in front of me dressed so sloppily.
While I was often criticized about my health and appearance, it was better than being hit. My joy during those days was hearing from Keith. He talked about trivial things like the seasons or his town, but I could always tell he was worried about me.
This year the watermelons are really good and so sweet. I wish you could come and try some.
That would be nice. If I'm feeling well, I'd love to visit.
The air is fresh too. I think it would be a comfortable environment for you.
Thanks for worrying about me. With Keith keeping in touch regularly, I felt less lonely and could endure George's scoldings. This life continued for over 4 years. and Keith graduated from college and married a local girl.
Lisa, my wife, said she'd love to live with you when I told her about you.
That was a typical message from Keith. Lisa, now Keith's wife, was a lively and cheerful woman, as I had often heard. I wouldn't want to intrude on your newlywed life, so I'll just gratefully accept the FOD. After replying to Keith, I quietly exhaled. I still couldn't let go of the faint hope that one day George would return to being the kind husband he once was, so I had no intention of going to live with Keith. It's okay, it'll surely be okay, I muttered like a mantra, enduring George's scolding.
Hey, where did you put my socks?
My mantra did not work, and George's harsh words fell on me relentlessly every day. The socks are right there.
Not these. Today is important. Do you think I can go out in these wrinkled socks?
George complained about socks that had only been used 2 or 3 times. But these are the newest socks we have.
Really, you're useless. It's basic manners to iron the socks daily so they don't wrinkle. If it's the same tomorrow, I won't let it go.
Leaving behind these unkind words, George left the house. Even though I knew he wouldn't look back, I hurriedly called out a goodbye. He's counting on me, so I have to respond. Ignoring the pain in my heart, I busied myself with household chores. I continued to endure George's unreasonable demands alone, and now years have passed. Upon his retirement, George seemed a bit calmer. It would be a lie to say I felt no anxiety about spending more time with him in the future. Still, I forced myself to see kindness in his actions, and was disgusted with myself for still searching for the man he once was. Unable to let go of my anxiety and faint hope, I found it hard to approach the living room where George spent his days. I watched TV only when he was in the room. A dish George might like was featured on the program, deciding what to make for dinner that evening. I turned off the TV and prepared to go shopping. Dressing warmly since the forecast said the high would only be 41 degrees Fahrenheit, even though it was April. Just as I was about to leave the house as usual, George called out from behind.
Wait a minute. I'll come with you to carry the bags.
What? Surprised by his unexpected offer, I almost dropped my bag.
It would be cold to walk. I'll take the car out.
Watching George quickly get ready, I pinched the back of my hand to see if I was dreaming. I pinched the back of my hand to keep it from being noticed, but it probably hurt more than if I had pinched my cheek. Come to think of it, I hadn't received a single insult today.
All right, let's go then.
As he urged me on, I got into the car, and then George said something even more surprising.
You can rely on me, you know.
Unable to believe he was the same person as the day before, I reflexively replied, yes. What had happened to him? George, perhaps noticing I shivered from the cold, quietly turned on the heater. Thank you. George glanced at me and smiled. It had been decades since I last saw George smile. It had been so long that I was shocked and instinctively looked away. 5 minutes into the car ride, George spoke again.
I'm sorry. I've been under a lot of stress from work, and I've been taking it out at home.
I see. Given his job as a teacher, he must have faced considerable pressure from many students and their parents.
I'm a flawed person. Instead of being supportive, I've hurt the family I care about, which is really the worst.
Seeing George's remorseful expression, tears naturally started flowing from my eyes. My kind husband, whom I had always believed in, had returned. Thank you for working so hard for us. I've always known and believed you're a kind person.
I'm lucky to have such a great wife.
Embarrassed, George smiled, and I found myself smiling too. Thank you. Let's keep it up from now on.
Of course.
From that day, George acted as if he was trying to make up for lost time.
I don't know if it's enough to repay you, but I want to be there for you, Sarah.
George said this with a serious look, and he took the initiative to care for my health and do the cooking. You're already helping a lot. Thank you so much. I felt grateful that I had kept my faith in him. As the seasons changed, it was around the time when the osmanthus fragranced the air again this year. Keith and his wife Lisa had planned to come over to celebrate our silver wedding anniversary.
I wonder if it's okay for Lisa to meet Dad.
Up until just before their visit, Keith was worried about George's behavior. It's fine, he doesn't say harsh things to me anymore, and he's actually very kind.
Really?
Although I had visited Keith and Lisa by myself before, this was the first time they would come to our house. If you're that worried, I'll talk to Dad. I thought that Keith would feel differently after hearing George's words.
Hello, is that Keith?
I handed the phone to George, who exchanged greetings, albeit awkwardly.
Keith, I'm sorry. I've been on edge because of work stress, and I've been too hard on both your mom and you.
I couldn't see Keith's face on the other end of the phone, but I could tell from George's demeanor that some of the tension had eased. After a few more minutes of conversation, George hung up, satisfied.
They're coming all the way here, so I want to entertain them myself.
George. The relationship between George and Keith had never been good, to put it mildly. However, I was genuinely happy that he was trying to make amends.
I'm thinking of doing a home party, and I'll cook everything myself. I've been a burden for so long, I want you to relax.
That sounds wonderful. Keith and Lisa will be delighted.
I'll cook everything from scratch. I've burdened you for so long. I want you to take it easy.
It was an unexpected suggestion. Even though he had been taking the lead in cooking lately, it wouldn't be surprising if he still felt uneasy about it. Filled with gratitude and emotion from his proposal, I responded, "If that's the case, I'll gladly take you up on your offer."
Sure, leave it to me.
Excited, I began to think about what else I could do for Keith and his wife's visit. Then I'll do the cleaning.
I'll be using the kitchen, so I'll handle that. Could you take care of the cleaning outside the kitchen?
Understood. Thus, we cooperated in preparing to welcome Keith and his wife. On the day they arrived, Keith and his wife's expressions were clearly tense, and their smiles were strained.
Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. It's been a while.
Nice to meet you, George, and congratulations on your 25th wedding anniversary.
Welcome. I'm so glad you both could come and celebrate with us today. I cheerfully responded, trying to ease their tension.
Keith has really grown up, catching such a beautiful wife.
George also casually spoke to Keith.
Dad.
Keith seemed terribly unsettled by his father's unusual gentleness.
Today, I've gone all out preparing the meal since you both came all this way.
Dad cooked.
But I'm not used to it, so I'm not done with the preparations yet.
George shrugged, showing his bandaged left hand, hinting at how many times he had cut himself.
Thank you. Just knowing you tried means a lot.
While Keith sat down, accepting George's kindness despite being puzzled, Lisa headed to the kitchen where George was.
If it's still in progress, I'd be happy to help out if you don't mind.
As I wiped the table, I felt the lively atmosphere that comes with the family being together. Lisa's active involvement with George naturally brought a smile to Keith's face. Seeing this, I felt immensely happy.
Well, the food's ready now. Shall we toast?
With the biggest smile yet, George offered me a glass as he spoke.
I really want Sarah, who has had it the toughest, to lead the toast.
Touched by George's kindness, I took the glass. With a pounding heart, I slowly raised my glass and took a deep breath. May this happiness last for. Mid-sentence, Lisa suddenly grabbed my hand forcefully and ran towards the entrance.
Run now.
Confused, I had no choice but to follow her due to her desperate strength. After we had left the house and walked for a while, we entered a cafe that came into view. Struggling to keep up with Lisa, I finally stopped and caught my breath, relieved.
I'm sorry for the suddenness, but I had no other choice.
Lisa was trembling and turned pale as she explained the situation. What? As she spoke, I felt the color drain from my face. Lisa said that when she was preparing the drinks, she tried to carry a glass, and George strongly objected.
I've been watching his actions secretly so he wouldn't notice me.
George, looking around nervously, poured a drink into one of the glasses, and then added something finely chopped.
It was aconite.
Aconite.
Yes, I hike as a hobby, and the mountains can be quite dangerous.
She explained, rubbing her arms with both hands.
There are many dangerous plants, things that shouldn't be eaten, and I've researched mountain flora extensively, so I recognized it immediately.
Even though I've never seen aconite, I knew it was poisonous. The beautiful purple substance in the glass looked stylish. I had no idea it was poison. Shaking with shock, my thoughts froze from the sheer horror of the revelation. It was Keith's phone call that snapped me back to reality.
Mom, are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine. Are you safe, Keith?
Verily. I just heard from Lisa. I'm glad you're okay.
Keith sighed, telling me what had happened at home.
It seems Dad didn't expect you to leave. He was in a daze for a while.
It seems he was stunned and hadn't noticed Keith nearby when I escaped.
Then, suddenly, he realized what happened and hurried out of the house, so he might be looking for you.
The cafe we were in was nestled in a complex network of alleys and wouldn't be easy to find. But I couldn't shake my anxiety.
However, don't worry. I've installed a location tracking app on Dad's phone.
Keith had given us mobile phones when he moved out, so we could contact him immediately.
I never thought the tracking app would come in handy like this.
Keith chuckled bitterly, seemingly struggling to contain his anger at what his father had attempted.
Also, I was able to check his computer.
Keith said Lisa had asked him to check if there was any history of obtaining aconite. Since I don't use a computer, George probably let his guard down. Keith found that the computer wasn't even locked. And on George's computer was a purchase history for aconite and messages from a woman George was involved with who was plotting to kill me for insurance money.
The reason Dad suddenly became nice was probably to let your guard down.
Keith's murmur dissolved into the air over the phone. After hearing everything, I felt as if I had been slapped awake. That George could. Like a life flashing before my eyes, I revisited his past behavior. Indeed, since Keith had left home, the violence had stopped. Back then, the cessation of violence had lulled me into a false sense of security, and I hadn't considered other possibilities. By that time, he had already been involved with another woman, and when he started being kind to me, he must have already planned everything. It was fortunate that Keith and Lisa came to celebrate, and that Lisa knew about aconite, because if I had been alone. Reflecting on it, there were many unnatural aspects. Even a preparation for our silver wedding anniversary, George had taken complete control of the kitchen. It was all to carry out his plan. Thinking of the worst, I got goosebumps all over my body. Keith, thank you. I'm going to the police.
Okay. It looks like Dad is headed somewhere completely different.
That's right. Now's our only chance. And so, Lisa and I decided to go to the police to report everything.
Whatever happens, I will protect you, Sarah.
Lisa, you are so reliable. Encouraged by her, strangely, my mind felt at ease. Lisa's inherent cheerfulness lightened the atmosphere. Afterward, my divorce from George was finalized without incident. When the three of us returned home, although tired from the ordeal, there was a sense of relief in our expressions as we looked at each other.
I've arranged with a lawyer to get alimony from him.
Thank you for everything. By that point, I had no more sympathy for George. Rather, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Moreover, having been mentally affected by years of George's abuse and violence, I was regularly visiting the hospital for checkups, which led to the police getting involved with him. With Keith's help, we quickly located George, and the alimony was paid out of his pension. I'm really in your debt.
It seems his mistress got what she deserved, too.
The woman who had conspired with George was quickly apprehended thanks to the information found on his computer. It looks like I can live without fear now. My heart was shredded by the betrayal of George, whom I had supported for so many years. Yet, trying not to worry them, I forced a smile.
Sarah, if you're okay with it, would you like to live with us?
That's a kind offer, but I'll be fine on my own. If my frail health were to cause trouble for Lisa, I wouldn't want to burden her. The last thing I wanted was to be a burden on my son and his wife.
We want to protect Sarah, who once selflessly protected Keith this time around.
Lisa said this, and then hugged me tightly. Lisa. In front of me, Keith, with a gentle expression, nodded in agreement. Thank you. It would be reassuring to have both of you by my side always. With that, I moved in with Keith and Lisa and started a new life. My only concern had been my health, but since moving, I felt unexpectedly revitalized. Thanks to that, I've been able to do things and visit places I had previously avoided, making every day feel fresh. Today, I woke up with the sunrise, opened the window to breathe in the outside air, and felt enveloped by the humid air typical of summer. After preparing breakfast, the three of us gathered around the dining table. As we finished saying grace, I grabbed the mayonnaise. Mayonnaise goes on fried eggs, I said firmly to Lisa, who was about to put sauce on hers.
No, Sarah, it has to be sauce.
Even over such trivial matters, we could speak our minds naturally, and I felt like I had finally grasped true happiness.
Both of you, eat up quick or we won't be able to go anywhere.
Keith said this almost like he was soothing children. Where are you taking us today?
Let's go to the dairy farm and get some ice cream.
I'm excited. I need to make sure I'm fully prepared for the sun.
Through these interactions with them, I felt the true sense of family and love I had finally obtained, and I resolved to keep working together. May this happiness last forever. I silently recited the words I couldn't say that day, feeling my heart dance with joy.